Welcome to the underground, you rebel scum. This is the American Expat. I had somebody ask a question that's been asked before. What is an expat? Why are you called American Expat? And I think I've answered that before in other videos, but I thought, you know what? Maybe I'm going to share this story and tell everybody how I became known as the American Expat, where all this stuff came from, what it means. And if you've heard other videos where I explained about expat and you know that I lived in China for a long time, stick around. Believe me, this story is going to be worth it. At least I think so. So grab your favorite drink, grab your favorite snack, whatever it is, and let's jump into this story. Thanks for sticking with us. Before I get into the whole story thing, I would like to hear from you. You can leave comments down below the video. It's also a great place for discussion. Or if you have a story, that's especially what I'd like to hear. If you have an interesting story, it doesn't have to be an expat story, but if you do have a story of living abroad or that sort of thing, I would love to hear from you because I always love hearing those kinds of stories. And now without further delay, let's get into this. So the first thing, what is an expat? Well, an expat is simply someone who lives outside of their home country. In my case, that being the United States, I lived outside of the United States. I lived in China, Europe a little bit, and that's kind of where the expat thing came from. Now, it didn't come up as a nickname until, I was living in China for a while. But we'll get into that. That's kind of part of the story that I want to share. Now, you have to go back a few years. It was cold. Colder than it had ever, well, not colder than it had ever been, but colder than it had been for a long time in Beijing. They have a long history, so I'm sure they had colder days. I mean, this kind of cold, you're stepping outside, the outside air felt like getting slapped in the face, that kind of cold. But I had to get out of this apartment that I was living in and away from the conversation that was taking place there. And, if you went back a number of years and had to guess where I would be at that point in my life, it probably wouldn't have been living in a broom closet with 3 other men in Beijing, China. And, the conversations I would have been having probably wouldn't have been which WrestleMania was the greatest of all time. But that was the discussion that was happening that day in the apartment among the other 3 guys that were living there. Me, I stopped paying much attention to professional wrestling when I was about 8 years old. I could tell you, there was Jake the Snake and Hulk Hogan and, Macho Man Randy Savage and all of that. But it wasn't something that I really followed outside of, as soon as I realized that they, it was kind of a theater thing and they weren't really fighting, I kind of stopped watching, But as a kid, it was kind of interesting. Anyway, that's beside the point. They were talking about that, and I decided to step out. I had about enough of living with 3 other guys in this broom closet apartment, and I started to think about how I had managed to get to that place. How did I end up in Beijing living this way? It all goes back to 2008. I had a job. I had just gotten married, and I figured I was going to be working for that company for until I retired or something. But then on this day, shortly after I got married, I get called into the office by the boss, and he doesn't want to look at me. He's looking down at the floor, and he tells me, your job is gone. Everything is moving to Mexico. Here's a week's pay. Good luck. And I didn't know anything about unemployment or any of that stuff, so I just started bouncing around from crap job to crap job at that point, struggling, doing everything I could to stay afloat. And it all kind of came together at one moment when my car got smashed to pieces in a car accident. And I, of course, bouncing around from crap job to crap job, you're always looking for something better. So I was looking through Indeed.com, I believe it was, some website, and I came across this thing about teaching English in China. And like I said, at that moment, I was quite frustrated with everything. Nothing was working out in the United States. And I just, remembered, I liked it when I was in China before. At that point, the longest I'd spent in China was maybe, 3 months or so at a time. So I'm like, why not? Nothing is working out. Why not? So I contacted them. They got in touch with me, did an interview over Skype, if you remember Skype. And the next thing I knew, I was on my way to Beijing. And that's, to what was supposed to be a job. But it turned out that there wasn't actually a job waiting. Instead, I arrived and I was to find a job from this guy who was the boss. He had like 15 to 20 foreigners that he pimped out to different schools all over the city. And what would happen is the schools would pay him money and he'd give you a little bit of it. I arrived into that. But I didn't care. Whatever. They gave you a place to live. And yeah. So I was living there with these guys, but I'd had it, right? There, enough of the midnight drunken conversations about pro wrestling and Australian politics. I needed a place of my own. So I stepped out into this cold air in Beijing, and I'm walking along thinking about that when suddenly I'm pulled out of my thoughts by this shriek from this truck horn. And, it would be hard to describe. It's not like the normal truck horns. The trucks over there do have normal truck horns like what you'd hear in the United States. But they have another one that's like this shrieking air horn. It's not like the old train whistles. It's something else. If you heard it, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you have been to China or some other part of the world where they have these, you can comment down below if you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I get pulled out of it, and I'm trying to get my bearings. Oh, wait a second. Where am I at here? Not because I was, losing my mind, except for the whole part of being tired of the conversations. And I liked those guys and the apartment. It's just, I'm a grown man. I need my space. And I'm looking around to get my bearings, and by the way, it's easy to get lost in Beijing, at least in this neighborhood. There are other parts of Beijing that were nicer, that were newer, but Fengtai, where I was living, was not one of those places. It had all of the variety architecturally that could be expected from something made in the Cultural Revolution, which is to say none. It was just concrete blocks with rusty windows as far as you could see, which wasn't too far because they just kind of disappeared at some point into the haze of the Beijing air. Now, a lot of people will say it's because, the bad factories. Part of it is the factories and the cars and stuff, but they also get these temperature inversions that trap all this stuff there. So it makes it much, much worse than it would normally be. But that's beside the point. Anyway, I was on my way to go see Robert, the boss, who everybody saw as a kind of a gangster figure. They had this story about him that there was this Irish girl that had wanted to quit the job, to stop going to these schools and go off on her own. And that he had, held her at gunpoint and forced her to sign some kind of a crazy contract. But I had gotten to know Robert over the time that I was there, and I knew that he was more of a computer nerd with a dad who worked in, customs in the government. Not really the gunslinger type, so I wasn't worried. But I go to Robert because I know he has apartments all over the place in here, and I tell him, look, I need my own space. It's great that you guys provide this, but I need to have my own space. And he's like, oh, I've got an apartment. There was a girl that used to work for me that was renting it, but she's gone now. So you can, have that for such and such amount each month. And I'm thinking about how much I make. And I'm like, okay, I can do that and still save money. So I've got that squared away. In about a week, I'm going to move into this place. And I go back to the apartment with these guys, and their conversation has moved on now. And just so you know, there's two guys. There's one from Australia, a young guy. There's another guy from New Zealand. So we've got an Aussie, a Kiwi, and there's a really young guy from America, another American in there. And like I said, their conversation had moved on from the pro wrestling, and now they were talking about this girl named Wendy, who was a 20-something-year-old who'd worked doing errands for the boss. I don't know what the attraction was for them with this girl, but she was nice enough. She just seemed kind of naive. But anyway, they were really taken with her. I think it was something that started with one of them, and it was like the liquor, the Chinese liquor that they'd share every night when they came back from whatever. It started with one and just kind of passed on to the others. So anyway, they are all liking this girl. and they're starting to have some kind of conflict because, so-and-so likes her, they like her. They're not coming out and saying it, but they're kind of, feeling a bit of jealousy about this girl. And I don't think too much of it because I know some things about her. I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. So I left again, and I went to the train station, which was just up the street. I used to take it every day. Line 10. It was, Jalman West Station on line 10. And I'm going in there. There's another train that goes somewhere else, and I'm going down the escalator, and there's another escalator going to another platform. And I look over, and there's a couple more of these foreigners that, Robert pimps out to the schools. One of them by the name of Clay. Now, Clay, he's a gay man from, where was he from? I think it's from Liverpool in the UK. And I happen to know that this Wendy girl is totally infatuated with this Clay guy, but she doesn't know that he's a gay man. She has no idea about that stuff. So I see him, they're off to go somewhere because it's their day off, which I felt kind of privileged because I guess that Robert had a little more trust in me. At least that's what I felt like. So I got to work at a normal school where I had, the weekends off. So I would get 2 days off. Everybody else just got one. And anyway, they're off on their one day to go somewhere to, I think, someplace on the big train. And this Clay character is a really flamboyant type. He gets all these fancy gifts from these men around the city in Beijing. I guess he was kind of pimping himself out, I think. Maybe not. He was giving the image that he was, but he certainly was getting a lot of nice gifts from people. Anyway, I see them. I go over to the market. I get some food, which the food was pretty cheap if you went and got street food. They had it everywhere. I'd go to these stands and you'd pay like 3 RMB, which at the time was like 45 cents. You could get something that tasted good. You'd feel full. And I don't know how healthy it was. But anyway, I head back and there they are again, arguing about Wendy and who she likes or whatever. And some of them joking, trying to pretend like they didn't also have a crush on this girl. And I don't think anything of it. A couple days later, I kind of the same thing. I'm coming back to the apartment. I come in, it's the evening, and there they are, and they've got this little laptop set up with, a movie playing, and they've got Wendy there. Except for some reason they had pulled my pillows and stuff off. You'd have to see this room. Literally like a broom closet with bunk beds set up on 3 walls. And, there's a little sink and a bathroom of sorts. But not exactly the kind of place you'd want to be staying. Well, anyway, they have pulled my pillow and stuff off of the bed, and she's sitting on it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't say anything, but it was like, gosh, come on, guys. You're the ones that like this girl. Why would you set her down on my pillow like that? Yeah, that was, and they're watching The Dark Knight, I think it was. And she was having a hard time, and they're trying to explain to her the difference between Batman and Badman. And no, that's not the bad man. No, that's the Batman. That's the bad guy. And she just, it wasn't working out. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. But anyway, it just reinforced that I needed to, to get out of there. So they start talking to her. And somebody broaches the question, which of us do you like better? Which of us do you think you like? And, I knew this isn't going to work out very well. But she's like, oh, I like blah, 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 Clay. And, of course, these guys being the brilliant guys that they were, they weren't stupid. They were pretty good guys. They tell her, oh, well, Clay, you know that Clay likes men. He likes men, and she's like, what do you mean he likes men? Well, he doesn't like girls. He likes men. And I'm thinking, well, this is kind of making me think of, explaining the bad man and the Batman. And they finally get through to her that Clay is, he's gay. He's attracted to men. Well, it doesn't go the way that they had expected. Maybe they thought that if she thought, or knew that he was gay, that she would choose one of them or something like that. No, she had a huge breakdown. there was these girls sometimes, and I don't think it's just limited to China, but they can become obsessive. And I guess she was that way with Clay. And she just had this total breakdown. It was so devastating. And she's like, I don't care. I still like him. And they they got this idea at the time that they would, take her and they would, I guess, take her to the club or something, which she had never been to the club. She was from some village outside of the city and had never done anything like that. But they thought they were going to help her to forget about Clay or to feel better. I guess they were feeling guilty for destroying her illusions or whatever. So they take her to the club. And the first thing she does, because when they went to the club, they had this person that would bring them in and give them free booze. Well, they had a bottle of, I guess, whiskey on the table. And mind, I wasn't there. I didn't spend time in the clubs. She grabs the bottle of whiskey and downs half of it before they can stop her. And then she goes up onto the stage at this club and starts, just bawling and doing all this stuff, and then throws up everywhere. They have to be escorted out. I found out about it the next day. I go into the office and they, there's the boss, Robert, and normally Wendy would be there because she does like all these errands for him. She's not there. So I'm like, oh, hey, where's Aunt Wendy at? And I'm thinking of the night before, like when they revealed the devastating news to her that her dream man was a gay man. And they're like, oh, she's sick today. And I'm like, what happened? And then, they told me everything. And, oh gosh. So that blew up. That was completely destroyed. Probably ruined her life. I don't know. I think she got better. Anyway, a few days later, I'm back in the office again. And this is when I started to feel like maybe I need to get out of here. I kind of had thoughts of that. There were the stories going back and forth and the whole idea of, the boss, Robert, being some kind of gangster figure. Now, I was good at saving money. I was saving. All these other guys, though, for some reason, they were like 2 or 3 paychecks in debt to Robert. And there was one guy that I knew, and he had been talking about, he was going to quit and he's going to go marry this girl. And I was working with him at the regular school. And, he'd told me that. And the boss this time, Robert's like, hey, why don't you have a ride with me to your school? And I'm like, okay. So he gets this BMW and we're riding in the back. And he's got this black case. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, that looks like a gun case. But there's no way. There's no way he's got a gun case here in China. And he's holding it and he's like, I heard, so-and-so, the guy that I work with, is wanting to quit, that he's quitting. And I'm like, yeah, I did hear something about that. And he's like, I've got a gun. And I'm like, what? You've got a gun? What do you mean? And he opens up this black case. And sure enough, it wasn't like a gun, where you shoot bullets, but it was a taser. One of those that you shoot like the probes or whatever and it zaps somebody. So he's got this taser thing and he's like, I've got the gun and I'm going to shoot him. How can he quit like this on me? I'm going to shoot him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, It was shortly after that experience that I just left. I wasn't like the others. I had my own bank account. I had my own stuff set up. I've got a Chinese wife, which, by the way, if you're wondering why she wasn't there in these apartments, it was because obviously she wasn't going to stay in the apartment with those guys. Even after I had gotten my own broom closet just to myself, she just didn't want to be in Beijing, so she was staying with her family. Anyway, I was already thinking I wanted to get out of there, and then this happens. And it was shortly after that that I took off. And it was during this time period that I picked up the nickname American Expat. There was another guy from Australia who went by Aussie Expat or Australian Expat or something like that. And they kind of gave me the nickname. And at first I thought it was kind of silly, but it stuck. And I've just used it ever since. So yeah, that's the story. That's my expat story. My crazy life in China. Sometimes I think about it, at the time, You don't think about it in those moments as something really odd or different. But looking back, of course, you know, it's like, wow, that was crazy. And there are many, many more stories that I could tell about those times and about other times. But I'll have to share those in another video. I think we're going on quite a bit of length of time here. Hopefully you enjoyed the story. I hope you share some of your own stories. They don't have to be expat stories. They can be anything. You can talk about it. If you've been to China, I'd love to hear from you there too. Or anywhere outside of the United States. It's always an interesting experience somewhere else. I'll leave it at that. I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.
ไปพะวงหลงเฝ้าสาวเจ้าบางประกงทางห้วยงงหลงเกอหาโอเวรกรรมจำพราก